"What are you doing to me?" Salana whispered, the question barely a breath, as if the wind on Veera could carry it away before it anchored in her chest. The word felt wrong and right at once. Wrong because no human should ever speak like that in front of a crew. Right because nothing about Veera made sense in human terms. Lights smeared beneath the observation dome as the survey ship arced down. Veera spread below in bands of turquoise and violet, a planet whose nights seemed to pulse from within. Salana pressed her palm to the cool glass and watched the curvature swallow the star field. She had trained for this, years of bioacoustics and resonant field analysis, but training did not prepare a person for the way a living world could feel like a presence. Jack stood behind her, rigid in his suit jacket despite the recycled gravity. He folded and unfolded his hands as if practicing a precise procedure. The two of them had once moved together in step, field calibrations, shared coffee shifts, late nights rewriting grant proposals. They had cataloged each other with the kind of familiarity scientists reserve for instruments. Now familiarity came with a new complication, separation, a quietly compiling ledger of favors unpaid, apologies half-made. "Sal," he said, softly enough not to startle the rookie tech across the room, "you've got the spectral readouts for the descent?" She turned, blinking tears back at the rim of her lids, tears that were not sorrow, but sudden, inexplicable vertigo. "Yeah," she managed. Her voice steadied when she found the professional register. "They're stable. Atmosphere's rich and complex aromatics. Bioluminescent markers are at 27 degrees below the twilight baseline. Habitat pockets look untrammeled." Jack's mouth thinned. He loved numbers. Numbers were neat boxes that could not betray. Yet he watched her with a different hunger now, a private inventory of soft expressions and gestures. He noticed the way her fingers lingered on the glass, how her breath trembled after watching the planet. He did not know what it meant, but he felt its implications. The shuttle settled into the low orbital slipstream. The mission commander called the approach, and the crew buckled, voices routine, minds not quite. Salana felt the ship's hull reverberate differently when they entered the lower atmosphere, as though the planet's own pulse had synchronized with theirs. On the readouts, a new pattern chimed, anomalous harmonic clusters, short, deliberate surges that did not match any known geological phenomenon. They disembarked into a dusk world where the ground itself seemed to breathe. Veera's air tasted faintly of crushed citrus and river mineral, but that was only a palate to the deeper impression, color moving like music. Foliage unfurled in spirals, it caught the soft light and refracted it into filaments of blue and green. Small motes hung in the air, living dust that glowed like confetti.
Salana walked with the device strapped to her hip, the survey rig humming along as she logged chemical anomalies, microbial signatures, electromagnetic variances. Scientific curiosity pulled her forward, a leash she had kept taut her whole life. Jack walked beside her, hands in his pockets, jaw clenched. The expedition team, 7 in all, fanned out. Scanners swept, cameras recorded. Salana stepped off the path when her sensor pulsed softly, a near inaudible chime that singled out a concentration of energy. It wasn't heat. It wasn't electromagnetic interference in the traditional sense. It felt like a whisper through the rig's interface, a note that vibrated at the frequency of something alive and intentional. "Over here." She crouched near a stand of filamentous plants whose tips glowed like bellflowers at dusk. Dust motes drifted between them, catching light and pooling around her boots. Jack shadowed her, but did not lean close. Professionalism or caution, or the small wall every ex had learned to build around their new, fragile acquaintances. She reached toward a flower. It was wrong and right to do so. Wrong because protocol insisted on gloved sterility. Right because the readouts softened when she breached that sterile layer. The flower pulsed under her fingertips, and the pulsation threaded into her palm like a current that tasted faintly of salt and memory. Spectrometer numbers rearranged themselves across her HUD, not in cold codes, but in arcs of pattern. Her breath hitched, warmth unfurled along her forearm in a gentle, spreading swell. "What did you get?" Jack asked. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor under it.
Response curve is atypical, adaptive bioluminescence. The flora is interacting with our field. She kept her tone even. Keep the data, she told herself. Keep the field notes. But her chest felt like it had been coral-stitched by light. They followed the gradient into a shallow valley where the ground sloped toward a seam in the rock, a mouth half hidden behind a curtain of vine-like growth. From within came a harmonic, low, layered, like a chorus of chimes, distant and near at once. The instruments beeped, caught and misinterpreted, then settled in a confused cadence. The valley's air carried a vibration that tuned itself to Salana's bones. Jack's eyes narrowed. Cave emissions are strange, he said. Could be geothermal, could be— You feel it, Salana said without turning. She had not wanted to speak so plainly, but the sentence tasted like release. He did feel it, the small forward pull under his boots, but he would not name it in front of the team. Naming meant admitting that Veera rejected their frames. They stepped into the mouth together, the world narrowing into a tunnel of living light. The cave opened into a chamber like the interior of a cathedral made by a careful, non-human hand. Stalactites flowed like inverted blossoms, each tip a filament of soft illumination.
The ground hummed beneath their boots, as if in expectation. At the center of the chamber stood a form, tall, graceful, its silhouette a study in bioluminescent restraint. It moved like water does when it has to be careful not to break anything around it. It was not an animal in the sense their textbooks understood it. It carried itself rather as a steward carries a flame, protective, ancient, aware. Salana's first thought was not fear, it was recognition in the most primitive sense, an immediate, visceral feeling that something vast and old had looked for her and found the exact wavelength she carried. Nirth, Salana would later name it in private shorthand, because language must reduce the world to something manageable. For that first second, she did not speak that name. She simply stepped forward. The being's skin, if skin is the right word, rippled with blue-green luminescence as the chamber's hum intersected with the creature's own frequency. Lines of light laced across its limbs like the circuits that lit their lab benches, but softer. There was a face, a suggestion of features, deep, knowing eyes, a mouth that was more a plane of expression than a slit. The air between them quivered. Nirth tilted its head, an almost human gesture of curiosity. It extended something that resembled a hand, long, tapered, with pads that threw the chamber's light into filigree. Salana felt the urge to step back and the equal overwhelming urge to reach. She stepped forward. The contact was not a touch in the way humans understood contact. It was a transfer of balance, a low, resonant pulse choking back and then letting go, like the first chord of a familiar song. Salana felt it in her bones, an easing, a sudden architecture of thought that did not speak in words. It threaded through her memories, not to steal them, but to line them up like beads on a string. It left her breathless in a way that was not sexual, but wholly intimate, as if someone had rearranged the furniture of her inner room and invited her to sit in a newly sunlit chair. "What are you doing to me?" she breathed, the title forming finally into language. It was not accusation, it was astonishment, a question directed partly outward, partly inward. Nirth answered, but not with a language they could parse. The sound was a shape, a low, resonant series of chimes that shifted near frequencies their instruments could only approximate. The translation modules tried and failed. The software returned interpretive images on the HUD, rivers, names that had no direct human equivalent, the sense of tending. Nirth's expression softened as if to say, teaching, recognizing, bonding. Jack moved like a guard. He stepped between Salana and the alien, not violently, but with a posture honed by instinct. "Back up," he said, voice thinned. "We don't know its vector. Stand down." Salana felt a warmth spread from her sternum outward, the same tide that had risen when the flora pulsed under her fingertips.
It was not heat, exactly. It was a certitude, a naming. She did not flinch from Jack. She lifted her hand and let Nirth take it again, reciprocating the contact. Consent was a shared rhythm. Nirth matched her motion with a small, deliberate pressure, not invasive, but binding in a way that felt like a promise of shared space. The moment extended, and the rest of the team's instruments recorded an anomaly that would take years to catalog. Jack's jaw clenched so hard a soundless crack echoed in Salana's vision. He watched as the two of them, human and keeper, found a minor private accord. In his sensors, he read misalignment. In his heart, he read loss. They left the chamber with samples and data, but Salana's pockets felt lighter, as though she had traded some weight for a new muscle memory. She cataloged each sample with the zeal of a scientist, annotating pH, isotopes, and resonance frequencies. Later, in the tented lab, she would replay the audio and watch the spiking harmonics. Later, the team would triangulate how Nirth's pulses interacted with the planet's flora to create a stable microclimate. But in the immediate moments after the cave, the measurement she carried was not something a machine could parse, the sense of being known. The days that followed folded into a montage of careful exchange. Salana took to returning to the chamber on pretext of further sampling. She and Nirth built a language of gestures and vibration, a tilt of a wrist that meant friend, a press of the handpad that meant I remember water, light sequences that answered questions not with lexicons, but with images. Sometimes Nirth presented objects, constructs of living filament that glowed with suspended luminescent beads, and sometimes Salana offered small human gifts, a scarf she had embroidered with a star map, a pebble she'd smoothed in the planetary stream. The scarf fluttered between them like a flag of surrender and trust. The pebble hummed faintly in Nirth's presence. Each exchange deepened the quiet binding between them, and each time Salana felt the same surprise, not carnal heat, but a comprehensive rearrangement of attention. Her thoughts narrowed and then opened in strange loops. She would sit on the lab bench at dawn and find memories of her grandmother's hands, calluses from bread making, coming to the surface juxtaposed with Nirth's luminous palms. The feeling left her both tender and bracingly alert. Jack watched this accumulation with the kind of calculation that betters itself time and again. He would stand at the perimeter of the clearing when Salana and Nirth deferred, offering help that went unneeded. He would hand Salana instruments she had not asked for, his fingers brushing hers in a manner that felt to him both necessary and nostalgic. Sometimes his eyes would dart along her profile, as if mapping the coordinates of where he lost her.
He rationalized his discomfort as duty. The crew's cohesion came from clarity, and he would ensure clarity by staying close. That closeness curdled. At night, Jack sat alone in the generator shed, the hum of machines the only soundtrack to his spiraling thoughts. He told himself he was protecting the mission. He thought of protocol. Why had Salana not called a second researcher into the cave? He thought of promises they had given to each other in softer times. He could feel his rational mind, his training, forming plans and counterplans. He imagined isolating the alien, cataloging the energy in a secured rig so they could study it without interference. He pictured Salana safe in a lab, clean data archiving, his name in the report as the one who prevented contamination. The image warped into something more desperate when he allowed his mind to go there. Salana laughing at a light pattern Nirth produced, leaning in, eyes luminous as the planet itself. He recognized the irrational tremor in his chest for what it was, and then tried to condemn it, to make it a flaw fit for correction. Salana sensed the shift in him, but did not see its full amplitude. She noticed his thin responses, the clipped tone, the way he blinked more frequently when the two of them had been in close proximity. She tried to confront him once, there under the false canopy of being a team leader rather than an ex-lover. "Jack," she said gently one evening as the crew prepared supper in a communal module, "I didn't come here to break what we had. I came to discover." He stared into the simmering pot as though its steam were a cipher. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "We're scientists, Sal. Attachment clouds judgment. The mission matters." "You think I don't know that?" she challenged, not loudly. She had a humility about the sacrament of discovery, a reverence that made her voice soft but unshakable. "I am cataloging everything. We will report. Nirth," she almost said Nirth is, and stopped because the word felt like a vow, "is a subject of study. We're not letting this cloud the method." He laughed without humor.
Easy for you to say when you're the one caught up in it. Something broke between them, a smaller, quieter break than a shouting match, but a crack nonetheless. The wedge eased its way into the mission like an insect through bark. Salana kept her focus on the data, on the wonder. She watched Nearth with a scientific care, but she also allowed herself the private sensation that the alien's presence was a balm, a steadying force. Nearth taught her things not in lists but in contact, how the cave's hum adjusted to their respiration, how certain flowers only opened when touched in a particular sequence, how light could carry a shorthand meaning like return or hunger or recall. Jack interpreted those lessons differently. He cataloged them as threats to order. His nights grew shorter, his temper smaller and sharper.
He began to make notes for himself, lists of contingencies. The sheets crinkled under his grip. One contingency labeled secure interaction. Another, more ominous, simply read limit access. He rehearsed his justifications beneath the generator hum until they sounded plausible even to his own ears. Where Salana found her center in discovery, Jack found his in control. The two centers did not align. The thing that most unsettled him, what sharpened his appetite for action, was not a single event, but the accumulation of small intimacies, a hand that lingered, a shared gaze full of a depth he could not enter. He watched Nearth present Salana with a living filigree, a ribbon of flora that pulsed in sync with her pulse when she accepted it. Salana cradled the offering like a rare specimen and smiled in a way that made Jack's chest constrict. The fissure widened when Salana defied a recommendation and permitted a delicate procedure, an exploratory resonance reading that required direct contact. The mission's ethic officer objected on protocol grounds, citing contamination risks. Jack sided with caution. Salana argued that the procedure, if controlled, would yield unparalleled data on interspecies communication. "I'm not asking to be reckless," she said to Jack in the lab, where the lights made their faces into maps. "I'm asking for trust that we can be careful." He said, "Trust isn't a blank check." Salana's reply was a look of bewildered patience. She could not make him feel the threads she felt with Nearth. She could not explain the way the alien's hands calmed a tenor in her chest, like the chord that resolves a suspended melody. Language often failed where vibration and touch succeeded. She accepted that. She also accepted that Jack's resistance was moral and human and complicated. She did not hate him for it. She feared where it might end. At night, after everyone had turned in, Salana would sometimes wander the perimeter of the camp and stare at the dark sweep of Veera. She would replay the exchanges with Nearth like audio tests. She discovered that the alien's presence altered her physiology in subtle ways. Her pulse lowered in proximity. Tissue tensions released. Her mind cleared of the usual static, as though an unseen equalizer attenuated intrusive thought. She wrote those observations into her field journal with a hand that trembled minutely with reverence. Nearth began to reciprocate in ways that felt like gifts. It arranged a cluster of flowers at the threshold of the camp, bioluminescent blooms threaded into a garland. Salana found it there on a morning and brought it to the tent, pressing it to her chest as if it were a medal earned for honesty. She did not intend for Jack to see, but of course he did. He watched her from the wash station, face a pale mask, as if some new gravitational field pulled Salana away from him. Words frayed in private between them.
Where phrases should have mended, they merely made the wound feel larger by exposing it. Both tried to be reasonable. Both tried to be professional. Professionalism began to look like estrangement. The tipping point was small, almost stupid in retrospect, a misfiled log, a misrouted data stream. Jack noticed it first, a packet of resonance readings from the cave that had been delayed in the routed queue. When he queried the system, he discovered that someone had altered the routing table to prioritize certain inputs and relegate others. His brow furrowed. Protocol required traceable logs. Jack followed the breadcrumbs and found anomalies pointing back to Salana's station. He confronted her not with accusations, but with an attempt to preserve the mission's integrity. "You rerouted the logging," he said quietly, unable to keep the accusation from trembling at the edges. "Why?" Salana looked at him, stunned not by the accusation, but by the suggestion that she would hide data. She thought of the scarf around Nearth's coils and of the pebble that vibrated faintly when the alien approached. "I didn't reroute to hide anything,"
she said. I rerouted to prioritize live harmonics. We were losing micro-events. The buffer. You didn't notify command, Jack interrupted. You didn't follow protocol. Her jaw tightened. You think I don't know protocol? Clearly, he said, and there was a hardness there she had not seen in him before, a thing resembling contempt. She left before the argument escalated, and when she did, the camp's soft lights felt sudden and solitary. The next morning, Jack sat up late, lit by screens. He downloaded manifests, cross-referenced entries, and scrolled through the audio from the chamber. He replayed the resonance and listened for the shape of Salana's laugh woven into the alien's chime. He tried to separate his professional duty from the rest of it, and found he could not. The seeds of a plan took root in the soil of his fury, not a monstrous plan at first, a controlled intervention, a way to force the mission back into its ethical lanes. He imagined a secure containment procedure that would allow them to study Nirth without interference. He rehearsed the steps in his head with the methodical patience of a man designing an experiment. He would need to be subtle, surgical. He would not harm anyone. He would not destroy. He would secure. As the scene around him hummed with sleep, he wrote the protocols on paper. He listed what he would need: a localized field generator at frequency Delta 3, a modified data router, a transport cage, language he forced himself to employ so the idea would sound clinical. He told himself this was for science. He told himself this was for Salana, too. If he could only get inside the cage where he could control variables, he imagined he could keep her safe. In the deep hours, when the moon over Veera threw thin silver through the camp mesh, Jack's resolve hardened.
It was not the resolve of a villain. It was the precision of someone convinced that the ends would justify any means. He imagined Nirth suspended in a controlled field, instruments recording its every nuance, a neat archive of harm avoided and knowledge gained. He would not, could not imagine what Nirth might feel. He did not know how to model an empathic being into his systems. His equations did not compute grief. Back in the clearing, Salana lay awake on her cot, hands folded over the garland Nirth had left her. The petals still pulsed faintly when she brought them to her face, a communion of light and scent that calmed the part of her that tended to panic. She did not sleep well. Wonder kept her ears open, as if expecting the planet to hum a lullaby. She had noticed Jack's distance and tried to bridge it with small human things: coffee made for him, a casual question about his childhood musical preferences, but the bridge had a missing span now. Her mind kept returning not to the possible betrayals, but to the intensity of connection with Nirth, a precise warmth that did not melt her, but reshaped how she thought of boundaries. She recorded page after page in her field journal, careful and merciless about the language. Consent maintained at all contact points, she wrote. Reciprocal pulsed resonance observed. Emotional affinity rising without physiological dysregulation. Continued monitoring required. She wrote as if a transcript of her own heart needed to be held accountable. In the morning light, the clearing thrummed with life. The crew prepared another excursion to a nearby lagoon, where readings suggested an unusual nutrient exchange between the flora and the subterranean currents. Salana packed her instruments with the ritual of someone who knits security out of routine. She glanced at Jack's station. He looked up, and for half a second their eyes met, an exchange that flickered like the tail of a comet. There was a plea in it, a flash of the man she had once loved. "Be careful," he murmured, the words half command, half prayer. "I always am," she replied. It was half reassurance, half a lie. They walked into the light together, and when the planet's hum swelled in a way that seemed to harmonize with their footsteps, Salana felt again the strange tug of being both scientist and pilgrim. She thought of duty and desire as categories that sometimes overlapped. She could not accept that they had to cancel each other. Jack did not follow her to the lagoon. He stayed behind at camp, hands busy with the modifications he drafted on paper. He moved with pale calmness, as if he were smoothing the edges of an inevitable fracture. He adjusted the frequency settings, calibrated the router, and checked containment schematics until the clandestine action read as technique and not as betrayal in his mind. Outside, Salana knelt at the water's edge and held into her hand a small bloom Nirth had woven into the form of a ring.
It pulsed against her skin in time with her heartbeat. She closed her eyes and allowed the gentle resonance to wrap around her like a cloak. It soothed the part of her that feared the unknown and amplified the part of her that trusted it. From the shadows of the nearest tree line, someone watched. Not as an athlete watches prey, but as a man watches the world he believes he can fix if he just rearranges the pieces. Jack's silhouette was a broken line against the bioluminescent backdrop. He thought of containment again, and wondered whether, in securing the alien, he would secure Salana's life and the mission's integrity. He told himself the plan would be surgical, irreversible in its calmness. Salana rose and moved back toward camp. She paused when she saw a flash of activity near the supply crate, Jack's shadow there, odd and quick. She assumed he was preparing for the day and continued walking, the ring of living light tucked into the hem of her sleeve. That night, when the camp had dimmed and most were asleep, Jack crept out with the tools he had assembled, small, efficient devices that hummed like the insects outside. He did not think of villainy. He thought of the future printed cleanly on laminated sheets, data preserved, asterisms cataloged, salvageable ethics. He would secure the interaction and then present the solution to command. He would not be the one to sign the cage closed with malice. He would be the one to close it so that history had a neat report and not a cautionary tale. As he moved, his hands steadied. The plan was elegant to his mind. He would isolate the resonance in a portable field, route the data through a stable server, and move the sample into a locked containment unit for analysis. It would be over in hours, contain study, careful documentation. He told himself that the arc of science justified this recalibration of procedure. He failed to account for the way Veera felt about being rearranged. Salana, pulling a blanket from the drying line, paused as a low note rolled across the camp, so faint it might have been wind. Her skin prickled. The ring at her sleeve hummed in answer. She smiled to herself, a private shore of warmth in a sea of bureaucratic cold. She did not know that two people's plans were about to collide. Hers, an honest, curious communion. His, a controlled intervention dressed as protection. Jack's breath fogged in the cold night air as he adjusted the generator's output and tuned the field modulator. He imagined the triumphant arcing would present to the ethics board, how he had preserved the lives of the crew and the integrity of the mission through decisive containment. He did not let himself imagine Neard's face in the sterile twilight of a lab, nor did he let his mind construct the look of being restrained. Back at the tent, Salana slid into sleep like a person folding themselves into a familiar chair.
Her last thought was not of Jack's hands, but of Nurth's, a reef of light that fit into the hollow behind her breastbone. It felt like belonging. Judge the night by the way it kept secrets. The camp slumbered. Machines hummed. Outside the mesh of the tent, something moved. Not someone, but the planet itself, correcting for an attempt at rearrangement. Jack's tools emitted a keening note as the field modulator misaligned. He frowned and peered at the readouts. Interference, not from instruments, but from the ground. Data packets began to drop. The router he had so carefully reconfigured spat errors, and then stabilized, but not in the pattern he expected. Veera resisted the imposition of tidy boxes. The planet's living pulse reorganized around the foreign field, like water diverting around a stone. He swore softly and pushed further, fingers moving with the quickness of desperation. The containment field hummed to life in a small pocket, a neat ring of manufactured silence. He imagined Nurth within it, luminescent and docile, the subject of 1,000 papers. He did not allow himself the image of Salana's face when she woke to find her friend contained. At the edge of camp, a low chord rolled out from the cave like the beginning of a storm. Salana started awake, listening to the world tune itself differently. She reached for her communicac. The screen showed no unusual activity. Yet centimeters away, the ring on her sleeve pulsed with a new cadence, faster, urgent. She rose and moved toward the clearing because Nurth's silence had presence. It could not be ignored. As she stepped into the open, two figures met her. Not the curving silhouette of Nurth in the chamber, but Jack in the center of his cautious construct. He stood with the field pockets humming at his feet, the devices he had engineered arranged like trophies. "Nurth," she called, voice slipping into the language of pleading. "Where are you?"
For a long, suspended second, nothing answered. Then, from behind Jack, a ripple of vaulted light skittered over the generator's casing and spilled into the tented darkness. It was a pulse that did not fit the field. It threaded around the devices and strobed across the ground like a searchlight. The air tasted different, metallic and alive. Nirth stepped into the light, not confined, not struggling. It moved with the quiet dignity that had defined it since first